It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. This is another edition of Frontline Friday with my very special guest, Bridget Gleason. Bridget, how are you this morning?
Andy, super. Andy, how are you and where are you?
I am fine, and I'm in New York City. World headquarters of the Accelerate Media Empire.
And did you really go from Hawaii to New York City? Is that that's a big time zone.
Couple weeks ago we did, yeah.
That's a big time zone shift.
6 hours. So
that'll mess up your sleep.
It did. Yeah, it did. It took a long time to sort of readjust coming back, but it's well worth it. So,
and beautiful in New York right now, isn't it?
It has been. Actually, we've had some unseasonable. We actually had record highs the last 2 days. And so we're recording this about a month before people are listening to it. We had record highs, and I think fall now is finally going to take hold today. That's what they're saying. So it's sort of late compared to normal years, but who knows what's normal anymore when it comes to the weather?
I know. Who knows what you're in store for on the East Coast? Having lived in Boston for a couple of years,
and then you
been
escaped
there for a couple of winters.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was back in Boston last weekend, and God, it was beautiful. Loved it. Fall hadn't hit and winter hadn't hit, and Boston is very lovable at that time.
Yeah.
In that period, Boston's lovable anyway. But anyway, well, good. Glad you're caught up on time zones and back in beautiful New York.
Yeah, raring to go. So today we're going to talk about books. We love talking about books. And
Dave,
on my travels, I had time to continue reading and just in a better venue, perhaps. But two books I read recently I thought were very interesting. I wanted to chat with you about. So the first one is a book called Absolute Value: What Really Influences Customers in the Age of Nearly Perfect Information. The nearly in parents, nearly perfect information. And written by two authors, Itamar Simonson, who's at Stanford, and another gentleman, Emmanuel Rosen, who I forget where he's from. He may be at Stanford as well. And to me, these are sort of these gentlemen are sort of the heirs, based on the writing, sort of the heirs to Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and other people that did real pioneering work in behavioral economics and decision science and so on. And what they talk about in their book is just about what the impact has been of information on the way buyers are making decisions. And what they're finding is that through their studies and their research and the research of others that they cite is that, we may that the effects are actually a little different than we've been thinking, and perhaps happening more quickly than we thought. So one of the things that there have been books, Barry Schwartz wrote, a professor from Swarthmore, wrote a great book called The Paradox of Choice, which I really liked, and others, that one of the theses in those books was that the influx of information and the sort of sudden availability of tons of information actually made it harder to choose, not easier. And that people are sometimes overwhelmed by information and so on. And what Simonson and Rosen found through their research, and they write about in their book, is really just the opposite is happening. And that perhaps there was a rush to judgment by some of these early authors like Schwartz and so on about the impact of what was happening on the internet. And that having sort of 20 years of history now, when they wrote the book and did a lot of their studies, is what they're actually finding is that buyers are able to gain an understanding of what they call the absolute value, which they define as sort of the experienced quality or the experienced value of what it would be like to use a product or service, and what the value and the quality you'd experience as a result of it without the intercession of the seller. They're saying, yeah, there's all this information out there. But if it was just information, yeah, it'd be hard. But the fact is we have all these tools as buyers at our disposal to help us develop a good enough understanding of the value or the quality of a product to enable us to make a decision. Just start with Google, right? As a tool to help us make sense of the data out there. We can start searching, but then there are, discussion groups, there are user reviews, there are, expert reviews groups, there are our social networks we can tap. The whole process that people go through to gather information is really winnowing down this vast trove of information down to something that's actionable for them. And so what they found is that rather than buyers being distracted, is actually increasingly effective in this environment in the way they use to find the data they need to make the decision. And all sort of oriented, I think, at one level, with this term absolute value they used, really to the good enough decision, which is the decision that most buyers make, right? Is they're not going to go on forever researching every single possible alternative to make the optimal decision. They're going to go to the point where they have the information that meets their basic criteria. And what they found is that one of the things that's happening, or several things that are happening, is that in this environment, there's a decreased value in the eye of buyers of what they call sort of the proxies of value. A brand name, product positioning, your value proposition, and pricing and promotion. That actually, the impact of those sort of traditional tools of influence is really on the wane. They haven't gone away, but they're on the wane. And so it's like, wow, this is eye-opening for us as sellers to say, okay, well, yeah, where do we fit into this equation in order to help the buyer make a decision?
Andy, I am tempted to end our podcast and go read the book. But I'm distracted by not having read it. I just think it's fascinating. So if you were to identify a couple of things that you would do differently or recommend to salesperson, what did you take away from it that you feel is actionable? Or are you still cogitating on kind of what you read?
Well, sort of both, actually. And so some of the early takeaways were, for me, were sort of confirmations of experiences that I'd had, that opinions that I had already even written about in some cases in my books, but arrived at intuitively, and I said experientially, as opposed to being data-based, based on research. And one of these was this whole notion of the fact that people begin their buying journey long before they engage with a seller. Now, this is a point that I know there's controversy about it. You've got folks at CEB who wrote the Challenger books about, hey, buyers are 57% of the way through their buying process before they engage with sellers. Other studies from like Serious Insights and others, or Serious Decisions and others, that saying, yeah, that's not true. It's much less than that. And people sort of have various stakes in the game, but to me, it confirmed the fact that, the buyers, they've engaged in this process well before they engage with sellers in almost all cases. And I won't say it's 100% of the cases because, nothing's ever 100%, but in the main, that's what's going on. And a perfect example that they talked about, which is, I think, the one that sort of makes the case for this, is think about your own history when you browse. I mean, do you ever bookmark a web page?
Uh-huh.
And why are you doing that?
So I can go back to it so I don't forget.
Right, because
I don't want to do it.
But it's information that you want to use again in the future, right?
Right.
Well, see, that's what buyers are doing. They're going through, and yeah, they may not have in place a buying action, a buying process to, actually say, okay, we've got a project we're kicking off to go make this change and buy this type of product or service. But they're constantly gathering information. And just the example of a bookmark of a web page. Yeah, we're going through, I'm going to bookmark this. I'm going to come back to it. I do it all the time. I've got things that I buy for my business or I buy for myself personally that I've got organized into my bookmark bar, excuse me.
Say that 8 times.
8 times real fast.
Faster.
And I go back and reference it. Well, that was me starting my buying journey for that particular product or service. So this is a common behavior. So to me, it reinforces the idea that when a buyer and a seller start talking, is that there's a degree of urgency there that oftentimes sellers don't recognize because the buyers have invested time and they are trying to make a decision. And one of the other things that they talk about in the book, the authors talk about in the book, and they found through their research, is that information that buyers gather proactively, they act on more quickly than information that they receive externally. Because
to me,
because they're saying, look, I've invested time in this to proactively gather it. In order to earn a return on that time I've invested, which is a concept that I talk about in my first book, then I need to take action. The action may be at the end we decide not to do anything, but they're going to take action on it. They're more likely to take action faster on information they're proactively gathering. So if you reach that intersection where you and the buyer overlap and start interacting, as I've contended, their need is urgent. But so often what we see in sales reps is they start going to back at the beginning. Right? Let me give you a company pitch. Let me talk about the company. Let me talk about our product, blah, 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 blah. Whereas the buyer's saying, look, no, I'm well past that point. I just need these questions answered, these remaining questions answered to help me be able to make my decision.
So my experience of late has been when the sales team knows if a prospect has found them and is proactive in any way, shape, or form, that there is a sense of urgency and that's a higher priority. That goes to the top of the list. I think what I think about is really for marketing teams, how do they make sure that they're in the mix, that they're being discovered and found and talked about and bookmarked, so that when it comes around, that the prospect is likely to reach out to my company about my product or my service, because there is that sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. So how do we get found? Mm-hmm. And that seems it's partially marketing, partially sales. I think sales people having a good, being active and having a voice on social media and other places and meetups, and it helps to make sure that you're part of that research process, even if you're sort of a passive player, but that you are more likely to be part of that research process. So when the time comes that you're being considered, and that you're the one that gets the phone call or the email or the chat or however they choose to reach out.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, and the authors get into this, they define what's called the appropriate influence mix to be able to attract the attention of potential buyers, and that's changing. So marketing, absolutely, this whole issue of sales marketing alignment becomes increasingly critical in being able to be discovered and have the right messaging that causes someone to say, yeah, I'm maybe in the early days, but that's compelling enough that I'm going to save that and come back to it.
I think I can't wait to read it. I've got a flight. It's not long enough. It's only 1 hour, but I read pretty quickly. I just don't know that I can get through the book in 1 hour.
I don't think so. No.
How long is it? No, it's
Yeah,
going to take
I
me a little
read.
bit.
I read quickly, but
Okay.
it took a couple hours to, at least to go through. So then the other
All right,
book.
so there and back. There and back.
All right, so that's one book. So the other book I want to talk about.
Oh dear, another one. Uh-oh. Okay, I feel myself getting distracted already. Yes?
Is a fascinating book. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction. And that wasn't me as having a lisp. That was math, M-A-T-H, Weapons of Math Destruction.
I love it.
Subtitle, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy. Written by a woman named Kathy O'Neill. And again, a fascinating book. And people are wondering, what's it have to do with sales? I'll get to that. She was a data scientist, PhD, taught professor at university, left to become a quant, if you will, on Wall Street, writing the algorithms to drive automated trading. And as an aftermath of the crash, began to see sort of the shortcomings in this, what she sort of calls an algorithm-driven world. And where algorithms are increasingly used to control aspects of our lives, like credit applications. She gives example after example about algorithms being used in place of humans to make judgments about creditworthiness, and how the algorithms use all these different factors like zip codes and so on as indicators of creditworthiness, as opposed to looking at the individual themselves. As a result, then have these practices like redlining and so on, where people in less economically advantaged areas or economically depressed areas, end up, because of the zip code, end up paying much higher rates on insurance and credit cards and loans and so on, which have nothing to do with the individual themselves. And then it starts perpetuating inequality in terms of income and debt and so on. And she went through all these fascinating examples about how algorithms are used. And her point, bottom line, was that the trouble with this big data and the algorithms is that every algorithm is based upon assumptions made by people, and that the assumptions are oftentimes biased and flawed. And so then they're replicated throughout the use of the algorithms. So even if you have some sort of machine learning, it's learning based on flawed assumptions. And she could give some compelling examples, like things like prison sentencing. There's software that's used that's algorithmically based that, in some cases, prisoners or people are convicted of crimes. When judges look at the software to determine sentencing, one of the factors that's included is whether there's anybody related to them that also has served a term in prison. And their algorithm then pops up a recommendation for them to have a longer sentence based on the fact they had a relative that had been in prison. So she's saying, we've got these basic inequities built into these algorithms, and based on these assumptions. And I started thinking about this from a sales context. I mean, I thought it was fascinating talking about the larger sociological implications, but in sales as well, we see this starting to happen because we've got increasing amounts of automation coming into our world in sales. And I was talking to a client, talking about, they've got software that call centers use, and on inbound leads, the rules are set up that on inbound lead, it always goes to the available agent who's got, highest quota attainment. And you start thinking about that. And my question to him at the time was, well, if you're never giving the people that have lower quota attainment more opportunities to improve and get better and do a better job and coach them to improve, then you're just creating this vicious cycle that they're never going to get better and they're going to wash out. And it's all based on the assumption that built into the algorithm, well, you got to give it to the best person, as opposed to let's get it to the people that we write, let's elevate everybody. So anyway, I know we don't have a whole lot of time to finish up the discussion, but it was a fascinating book, and another one of those that's still thinking about the implications of it in our world, but there clearly are.
Yeah, I think that it sort of is along the lines of one of our previous discussions around the sales tools, and if they helped, are they helping, are they hurting, and maybe some of it is just these algorithms gone wrong. And I mean, based on human assumption, sometimes that's going to work in our favor, that we need the human interaction, and sometimes it's going to be flawed. I'm distracted by wanting to read and understand this. I mean, part of the reason is I'm in big data and have been in big data and plan to stay in big data. And so the implications for not just sales, but sort of across the board, because it does touch all aspects of our lives, just this proliferation of data.
Yes.
And the variety of data that's being collected, the velocity at which it's being collected, it's staggering. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to analyze these volumes of data and gain value from it. And I'm not surprised that we're making bad assumptions. There's too much of varying differences in them that's coming at us too fast. And I think we're making decisions based on this data. And I'm super curious to read her book and to understand how we can get better at using the data to make better decisions, whether they be in sales or some of the social concerns that she brings up. I think I'm really looking forward to reading it. Which one should I read first? Weapons of Math Destruction or Absolute Value? I'm not able to multitask in that way.
Right.
Like half brain, half brain.
Well, I think if you prioritize sort of the larger good first, I'd probably start with Weapons of Math Destruction, just because it's broader reach beyond just our field, and it's very challenging for us as individuals in the society, individuals that can have an impact on other people. Is this whole idea of how we're using data is very compelling, and so I think that's a good place to start. But I would follow right away with Absolute Value. For those of you who aren't perhaps interested in larger sociological implications, start with Absolute Value. Both great books.
Andy, very excited. I'm like I said, I'm super excited that we're at the end of the podcast, because I want to start
going onto Amazon.
I want to start reading. Unfortunately, I can't start reading right away, but these are two great recommendations. Very thought-provoking, relevant. I'm sure these topics will come up. These books will come up again for us.
Oh, I think so. So, well, good. Well, again, I know you need to jump on Amazon to get those ordered before your next call.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
As always, pleasure to speak with you. Friends who have been listening, thank you again for taking your time to join us. If you have any questions about anything we spoke about or about sales in general, remember, email me at andy@zerotimeselling.com. I believe our next episode will be answering some more questions, user questions or listener questions, and looking forward to it. And looking forward to talking to you, Bridget.
Likewise. Have a great day.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.